All right.
All right.
We are live. We're back with Difficult Discussions, episode 4. Um, technical difficulties notwithstanding, we're here. We're ready to do this. So tonight, I've got a couple new guests, and I'm going to let him get that sorted out.
Trying to right now. All right. I think we're good right there.
Growing pains. Good time.
There we go.
All right. So this is an interesting episode this week. I have 2 new guests. I'm going to start with my guest panelist, who's a first-time member to the show, has not seen an episode before, but he was willing to come on because he has a course of beliefs that he would like to share with us, and it's going to be relevant to the topic tonight. So, Mike, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself so we can all get to know you.
I don't know, nothing special about me. I mean, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I pretty much spent my first 20 years of my life on the south side. The next maybe 10 years or so on the north side. I spent some time on the east side and the west side as well. Now I'm in suburban areas. Well, not suburban area, I'll say more rural than anything. And I don't know, I guess you could say that I kind of got both sides of the story, you know, when it comes to, you know, black and white and, you know, police brutality and black on black violence. I consider that I kind of stepped outside and now I'm on the outside looking in and things are looking kind of different from me. So, I mean, I'm just an ordinary guy working 9 to 5, you know, I'm in manufacturing and, you know, I don't really watch TV, you know, I work, I come home, you know, eat and I go to sleep pretty much. You know, I'm not so big on the media or anything. My hobbies is, you know, I like to fish, I shoot, and, you know, just a regular guy, you know, just here to give my opinion.
All right. I appreciate it, and welcome to the show. Now, you will be speaking with Vernon, who has been on the show before, but I will allow him to introduce himself again for new viewers.
Vernon, assistant principal. I always tell people I'm a coach and an educator. A coach because I motivate people. I like talking to people. I like accomplishing goals with people. Educator because I don't want people walking through this world blind. The way this world gets better is more people learn more. That's my whole educator spiel. But been on the show because, like we've said for weeks, the comment section, I don't want to call nobody soft. The comment section for people, that's where they hide. But this is a good place, safe place for us to have disagreements and also show how much we have in common, even though we disagree. So, welcome, Mike. Welcome, D. But that's why I'm here for. Not fact checking this week. I love this topic. So,
All right, now, D, introduce yourself. This will be our fact checker today, and he's going to be relaying the good, juicy bits when information is relayed. So tell us about yourself.
Where to start? I just turned 39.
Happy
Graduated from
birthday.
State University. Graduated from Full Sail University with my master's in media design. But if you know me, if you follow me on social media, my big passion is research and history. Just going through the history, there's a lot of stuff that we have been taught, and there's a lot of stuff because we're in an information age that we can actually go back and see things. So, you know, outside of everybody knows me as a big wrestling fan, big gamer, all that stuff. In the past 10 to 15 years, it's just been, you know, a whole bunch of reading, researching. Yes, I like sports, I like all that, but especially during the time of quarantine, because I'm working from home now. And that has gives me a lot more time to actually do some research compared to when you had to wake up, you had to leave the house and stuff. So that's just me in a nutshell. I love sports. I love researching. I love food. There's a lot of things I like, and that's just me.
Fantastic. We appreciate to have you here tonight. So the topic tonight, again, is going to be the impact of black on black violence versus police brutality and racism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm going to allow my new guest, Mike, to start. Give us a little bit on your take and thoughts on this topic and how it relates to you.
Well, I mean, I don't think police brutality has it has an impact. It has a great impact, but it doesn't have an impact the way that black on black violence has an impact on us and in our community. And I mean, I just see that as fact. My whole time growing up on the south side of Chicago, I didn't go outside and fear the police. The most I feared was getting shot by someone who thought I was their enemy. In my time growing up, we played ball on the corners. We played football and we hung out outside every day. And now that the violence has increased, the new trend is to go out and kill someone for reputation. Times has gotten a lot worse. It's even more unsafe to go outside than ever before. Even more people moving from Chicago because of the violence, and I don't think all of those issues has anything to do with the police.
Okay, I respect that. Now, Vernon, how would you take tonight's topic in relation to yourself and your belief system in the subject?
So I come from a different scope. I work in the public sector, especially my role as an administrator. I deal with a lot of discipline. And even when we talk about violence, I think we kind of dismiss some parts of violence and we don't consider the full scope of it. It's kind of relativity bias for us for what we see around us and what we see impacts the near us. When I worked in one public school district, I would say one thing we worried about the most would have been fights.
Mm-hmm.
But I work for another public school district and I worry about narcotics and things like that. Teenagers are teenagers and they make bad decisions. And those things are considered like bad offenses, no matter where we're at. But I think that we get to a point where I'm almost on Mike's page with what may directly impact us, but I think that's mutually exclusive of removing a threat or removing an issue. So just because I work at a school with very minimal fights doesn't mean I have minimal discipline. Just because there's crime in certain areas doesn't make some criminal act okay because they don't have the same direct impact. So I mean, we got a long show, but I think that's one thing about it is um, even the term black on black crime. I think that's made up just in order to sensationalize and to criminalize black males because crime is homogeneous. So no matter what, who you are socially, ethnically, um, emotionally is kind of tied into who things happen with, who you hang with, who you party with. You know, if I go to Michigan State, I may get a MOI, MIP
MIP,
with
yep.
other Michigan State students.
Mm-hmm.
I might not get an MIP with somebody from Alabama because I'm in this homogeneous population. So I think when we use black on black crime, I can say, where's poor on poor crime? Where's white on white crime? Where's middle class on middle class crime? Where's college student on college student crime? We sh- we should do that the exact same way, but it is to kind of deflect from one issue that's mutually exclusive from another.
All right, Mike, and based on Vernon's response, what would you say to that?
Oh, did we lose Mike for a moment?
I think we did.
Oh, no, he's
There
there.
we go.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. I got a phone call. Sorry about that.
Yeah, tell him to watch the show.
Yeah, but on that subject about poor on poor crime, middle class on middle class crime. Now, I'm not a professional or anything, but to me, it seems like racism is the poor on poor crime. And drugs is the poor on poor crime. We distribute drugs amongst each other, and whether we know they're right or wrong. And when you look on TV, it's the poor folks who's who's in the midst of, you know, the protest and vandalism and, you know, fighting amongst each other, while the rich folks are at home either watching their television or watching from above somewhere, you know, and just witnessing it all. You know, poor people take most of the hit, you know, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I
like
agree.
I'm with that, but here is a couple things. I think it was Van Jones said it best, and it took me back to being an undergraduate. I won't say the university because it's the greatest university, Harvard of Hancock County, Ohio. But but I saw more drugs done when I was in rural Ohio than I ever saw when I was in northwest side of Detroit, all black communities. I saw more types of drugs. Like, yeah, when I was in high school or maybe saw people in the neighborhood, yeah, I knew people that may have smoked marijuana. I never saw people crush up Ritalin and take it up their nose when I was at Southfield. I never saw people doing lines of cocaine or even asking for it. Like, I don't even know the availability. So I get there are certain areas, but just like when I look at some communities, well, what about trailer parks and meth, amphetamine epidemics in trailer parks and heroin in suburban communities? Oh, we don't call it heroin when it's rich people. We call it opiate addiction. But it's the same thing. So drugs are everywhere. Uh, it's just that it's certain drugs that we associate with certain people, and we go throughout history. So we look at the crack epidemic in the 80s and act like that's anything near what you're seeing in Metro Detroit, what you're seeing in New York, what you're seeing in Philly. I can't speak for Chicago, but I don't think it's a whole bunch going down because it's just crackheads walking around the projects like it was back in the 80s. So I think that stereotyping is what's leading us to believe some of these things are plagues that they aren't, because they happen in other communities.
Right.
Drugs happen in rich communities. Violence happens on college campuses every day. Sexual assault is rampant in on major college campuses, but we don't consider it student on student crime and say that there's a major issue we need to solve. But I guarantee if you talk to any father about to send his suburban daughter off to a major college or university, what is he probably going to give her a speech of? Not worry about black guys killing black guys in your dorm. He's not worried about that. He wants you to make good decisions when you go to a party or something like that. Don't drink. Hey, make sure that you're with friends when you're walking home. They're not blue lights on campuses and telephones back in the 90s and early 2000s because they're worried about two black guys on a college campus shooting each other. And that would have to fit the same narrative for black on black crime. All of us. I live in the suburbs now. I'm an assistant principal. I've been in education 16 years. If black on black crime was a thing, then I would naturally just want to commit a crime against a black person, or somebody will want to commit it against me, no matter where we're at.
Now, one thing I would like to add to that, because of the extension of the topic where it carries over into police brutality and racism. Now, obviously, crime has a proximity.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to have issues near you. So, where you happen to be in relation to other people would be the most statistical, reasonable outcome of what's happening. So, in terms of racism, so if you're in an area that, say, is predominantly black, you're probably not going to encounter overt racism just due to the fact that you don't have non-blacks that you're encountering against you. At least you may see racism perpetuated against others or stereotypes levied to other people in your presence, but as far as directly oppressing you, not having that element of race different than yours would obviously cause that not to be a prevalent thing. However, you encounter the police, you are capable of encountering someone who may not be the same ethnicity as you, also in an authority position. If you were doing something wrong and you're questioned, you may feel that you're being oppressed, not recognizing the fact that you have done something to cause them to talk to you. So, in terms of the police, in terms of racism, Mike, what are your thoughts there? In terms of how you feel about it in relation to how you have your thoughts on the violence that you saw coming up, perpetuated against you and the fear you had against your fellow man. How does that relate to your feelings toward the police activity, especially questionable police activity?
I think both are bad. I mean, police brutality is real. I understand that, and bad cops do exist. I personally, I'm not gonna say I don't like the police. I hate the police because that's a very strong feeling to hate someone. But I've never really had any good experience with the police growing up. Not that I'm afraid that they'll kill me, but there's a lot of disrespectful police out there. A lot of tough Tony, if you want to say, police officers out there. But as far as getting killed by them, I never feared that. Even to this day, I stay in a predominantly white community, Coles County, down by EIU. And I've been pulled over several times, and they could be a bit more lenient than the inner city cop actually, on things. But and as far as racism, I stand again. This is a predominantly white community that I stay in. I've yet to experience any racism. Instead, I've had people, reach out, and help me out. Like I was just without a vehicle the last maybe last year, and I was walking down the street with bags, and an old white guy stopped to say, "Hey, I'm headed your way. I'll give you a ride." And I'm like, that's okay. I'm cool. I'm cool. He said, "No, I'm willing to give you a ride. It's cool." I didn't have nothing to fear. I really don't fear anyone, so I accepted the ride. He was telling me, yeah, this is a rural area. A lot of people don't have rides. I have a problem helping people out. In which I know there's people like that everywhere. But I've also had it where guys actually give me their car. Here, take my car, keep it for as long as you need it. You need a car down here. And these are white guys who barely know me. And I haven't, grew up, and it can happen in the black community. I have family and family backwards, but that's just something I never thought or expected to come from a white guy. I always thought that white people were racist. Why would you do this for a black guy you don't even know? And as far as the police, I never experienced anything bad for them yet, either. And in my mind, racism, it exists, but it isn't really an issue for the black community. That's nothing we need to be worried about. The problem we need to worry about is us killing each other, because that is one thing I have worried about in my life. I have friends who died from gun violence. There were times where I was afraid to go outside if I didn't have a gun, or there is times which is going on now where kids can't even play ball on the corner like I used to do when I was a kid. They're not playing football, jumping rope outside right now. They're in a house because guys are running around shooting and killing each other. That's an issue that we really need to address. And Black Lives Matter and those organizations, they don't really address things like that, things that we really are afraid of, and things that's really taking effect in our communities right
Vernon, I'll let you follow up with that.
Well, I think we're kind of talking about a couple things. Like, yeah, I'm trust me, I'm gonna be the last one to say like every white person is racist. That's not even close. The thing about police and policing, I think, really comes to a higher expectation. Um, like you mentioned, bad cops. I'm gonna kind of just go down a couple things. I'm just trying to figure out the
Continue.
definition
I'll
of
be
good.
right back. I'm sorry. I got something I have to do.
Oh, gotcha.
Go
But
right ahead.
like, I don't like talking about like good and bad cops. Like, I just want to know when that line is met and what that definition is, because a cop that pulls over somebody that doesn't seem fit, yeah, like they can say it's just good intuition. Well, when they start asking young African American males, late teens, early 20s. What are you doing? Where are you going? Do you have weapons on you? The things that they just wouldn't even traditionally ask anyone in a routine traffic stop. Sorry, you stop someone for license plate light out, just so you can see, oh, do I smell marijuana? Do I see, like, is that a good cop or a bad cop? So I don't think the end game of killing somebody makes you a good or bad cop. I just think when you overstep your bounds of your position of duty, that's what makes you bad. And it's not ever going to be situational. Working it, working in public education, it's kids and parents that say vile things to staff members, send mean emails. People do some negative things. I would dare a teacher to ever step outside of what their duties are and say that a kid is stupid. Oh, well, I'm working hard to teach them, but the kid just can't learn. That would be immoral, unethical, all types of things. So if you do it as a police officer, I don't think that's right. But the next thing is really violence and things like that, like black on black crime. Well, here's the thing. I don't worry about if somebody commits a crime, like two citizens, regular civilians, commit a crime against another person. I'm not worried about the justice system protecting them. If I see a video of a black male shoot another black male, in Detroit, we had this video at a Coney Island this past summer that kind of brought up this type of discussion, where you see a guy, it seems like for no reason, shoot and kill three people inside of a Coney Island. It's disturbing. It's like, man, that this is wild, wild west out here. But I don't think it ran across anybody's mind that once he was captured, that he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. But when we're looking at Kyle Rittenhouse
Yeah.
driving to Wisconsin, I don't care if he drove 5 feet, and he shoots two people, all of a sudden, well, he was in fear of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And he needed to protect himself, even though he
Mm-hmm.
put himself in this situation. Or a police officer. Well, if they would have just listened, then they wouldn't have did this and they wouldn't have did that. Well, that doesn't make sense. So it's not about what has a direct impact on the African American community, but it's really about what happens with our belief that justice will prevail, and it's not something that can become normalized and accepted.
All right. All right. I'm going to add this. I mean, since I am fact checked, I'm just going to add this stat. I found this is from last week's USA Today. Between 1980 and 2008, the U.S. Department of Justice found that 84% of white victims were killed by white offenders. 93% of black victims were killed by black offenders. So, if we're going to talk about this, is just me saying so. If we're going to talk about black on black violence at that percentage, we also got to talk about white on white violence as well. Because those things are, even though it's a 9-point difference, you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And if you start adding other races to it, then you will see a pattern that most people who are killed by somebody in their own race.
Exactly.
If you understand what I'm saying.
So
Which
it
is
will
a
be
problem.
but that it's also, I think when that argument gets used, is to criminalize
Right.
the African American male because it's just, and I'm not trying to get into gun talk. I know it's a whole bunch of Second Amendment enthusiasts in this dialogue right now. But I think one thing that tends to happen, I say statistically, like fellas, we're in our own homes.
I'm safe. I feel very safe.
I lift weights. I feel safe. but no, but on the real, it just gun ownership, and I'm not saying this. You can fact check me on this. There is a higher probability of you harming yourself or a loved one with your weapon as opposed to a burglar breaking into your home. But you still do that because of the possibility. Well, the possibility of interracial violence is limited when communities are built around you being around people just like you.
Right.
So it's hard. The one thing, I mean, that just is not to get too political. When I see commercials or I see the Republican National Convention trying to tell Americans that your home isn't safe in suburban America, trust me, there's nobody driving from South Side of Chicago or taking the L up to Evanston just to kill someone. That does not exist. It's not a threat. Now, someone on the south side of Chicago might kill someone on the south side of Chicago. Somebody from the east side of Detroit will kill somebody on the east side of Detroit. But people aren't traveling from Mack and Bewick to Grand River and 7 Mile just to shoot someone. It just doesn't exist.
And on that note, why should the black community fear white supremacists? If that's the case, if that's the case.
Because you have, I'll say this, because before the civil rights movement, you saw that white supremacists could openly be white supremacists. They could inflict harm, danger, and death on African Americans, and they would be protected by the judicial system.
Right.
And when you
It,
see
it used to
police
be that
officers,
way.
huh?
It used to be that way.
In some ways,
But
it
when
kind
you
of is though.
but when you can see it happen, where an entity that this may be where you're going. If we're saying police officers are getting a bad rap, they get a bad rap because historically, groups that are protected against killing citizens are feared because there's no repercussion for you. If there is no penalty, what stops you from doing something? If your union will protect you, if the legal system will take into account your profession, no
It,
other profession can be used against or used as a defense for why you make a bad decision
Right.
and a reckless decision.
I'm going to add this fact check since Vern did ask me a fact check. I'm just going to read this out real quick. This is from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia Research Institute. I'm going to just read these two facts. Those people that died from accidental shootings were more than 3 times as likely to have a firearm in their home as those in the control group. Other point, among children, the majority, 89% of unintentional shooting deaths occur in the home. Most of these deaths occur when children are playing with a loaded gun in their parents' absence.
There are no accidents, only negligence.
can I make a comment on that right quick? What's room?
Yes, sir.
All
Hey,
right,
I
yeah,
wasn't talking
guns.
about
That may be fact. It may be fact, but okay. How many children die from household cleaning products every year?
I can pull that up. Hold on. You mean talking about household cleaners?
Yeah, household cleaning products.
Well,
I mean, because if you can say, hey, you know, even a good law-abiding citizen who owns a gun, even their children could be a victim. You know, if you want to bring that argument up, you have to bring the argument up over how much cleaning products can kill your children
They
as well.
can,
I mean,
but
but
I
after
think
saying this, I just want to say this. I don't have the raw numbers on that. I was just quoting statistics. If I had the raw numbers, it would be a lot easier to actually compare that.
You are
The
the
raw
fact checker.
numbers.
See if there are some.
because I believe
look that up.
proper training, and you know, if the black community were more aware of their Second Amendment rights and trained every day and practice their Second Amendment rights even more, you know, a lot of our issues and our problems coming from our community wouldn't exist.
But my question would be, so how would that stop irresponsible people getting a hold of guns and using
But
them?
for example, when we were young, you know, and I knew guys who were up to no good, you know, and we had a neighbor, you know, he was an ex police officer. He was a retired police officer. We knew he had guns in his house, and there were never rumors or anything about, because he had money too. He had a nice white Cadillac, you know, he had expensive dogs. We knew he had money, but there was never ever rumors of anyone trying to break into his home for the simple fact we knew he had guns. Now, there were rumors of people who fell victim of home invasion because we know for a fact they don't have guns in their house. And I believe that if the black community, good law-abiding citizens, knew that it was their right to have guns in their house, and a lot more criminals were aware that good people have guns in their house and they know their rights and they will use them, then there will be lesser crime.
Right, but a majority of breaking and enterings happen during the daytime when people are off at work. If you work in a blue collar community, I'm not going to go in your house at 3 in the morning. If I want to take your TVs or your goods, I'm going to break into your house by knocking on your door, making sure nobody's there, so I can break into your house. So whether you have a gun anywhere, even if you have guns in the house, it don't matter if you don't have a finger. If the finger is in a separate location, that does nothing to stop burglaries or anything like that. But my thing about the black on black crime thing as a kind of dilutant to police brutality and things like that. This is why I say they're mutually exclusive, is because yes, crime is bad. We should address crime. I don't have an expectation that people with nothing try to gain something off of others. That I
It's
understand
crazy
that.
but true.
Yeah, I mean, but I understand that. And that's not new and that's not exclusive to the black community. Just because um, someone tries to take your goods in the black community from your home compared to somebody trying to take your goods by cybercrime, they're still taking from
But
you. Yeah. So that's not that doesn't matter to me when we're breaking down that crime happens. I just have an expectation that officers of the law should first not be in fear of black males because they know how violent black males can be because of this rumor of black on black crime. When it's the same, if 74% of, or I'm sorry, 84% of homicides towards white victims come from a white perpetrator, then we should have the same level of fear.
Right.
But conversely, I would say if we minimize the threat or the impact of police brutality or racism on the black community, I would just say as Americans, we should not fear terrorism because
so
terrorism doesn't impact us as frequently as random crime. And
so
also, statistically, crime isn't random. Drug dealers kill drug dealers.
Let me
So
get
you,
Mike in here real quick.
yeah,
Let
I
me
got
he
you.
can get something. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
okay, I understand what you're saying. You know, when it comes to black on black violence, hey, there's black on black violence, white on white crime, Mexican. Everyone's community have crime amongst each other. Well, when you look at police violence and police brutality, falls under the same category. Every community, every race falls a victim of police brutality. He was even said that white man was the number one in police brutality, and they were most likely to be killed by the police than the black man. So if you want to argue that every race, you know, has violence against their own race, well, every race has violence against the police as well.
But then you would be looking at raw numbers. When people throw out that more white males are killed by police, first off, every police shooting isn't leading to protests. Every police involved death isn't leading to protests. It's the ones that don't seem to make sense, or the ones that we watch and see how that doesn't make sense. I'll tell you this. I used to be if you listen and if you understood police, then you would understand how tough their job is. They got to make it home, all of these other things, which I still agree with that conceptually from doing their job. But when I watched the Philando Castile shooting, that made no sense to me as a father, as a husband, where you fire off a few rounds into a vehicle with a baby in the back because you are afraid because you see an African American male that you know has a gun, and your mind goes to thinking he is a lethal threat. Even though the stop wasn't contentious, he told you he had the weapon, so it wasn't a secret. He wasn't trying to hide. And there were no optics of his vehicle that said, I'm about to put you in hurt, harm, or danger, seeing that I have a woman and a child in the vehicle. But I think the other thing about what you're saying with looking at raw numbers, if you actually take the probabilities where you're looking at statistically what happens with, and this is law enforcement data, police brutality or excessive force, where they say for the crime committed or for the infraction, the force that was used, black males are 3 times more likely to receive excessive force than white males, meaning a traffic stop for speeding leading to tasing or physical detainment happens 3 times more with someone that looks like us than someone that looks like not us.
Right. Let me add a few things before you continue. Number one, going back to that, what Vern just said, we got to think about proportionally. White people are the majority in this country, and obviously the majority is going to have some things happen to them a lot more raw numbers than everybody else. So we have to look at the ratio and the proportion. I can't pull it up now because there's no way for me to get to my Instagram, but I have a mill that I fact checked, and it did everything by proportion. It did everything by raw numbers. Then it drew it out to proportion, and it really told a better story than what raw numbers would have. So we just have to keep in mind that raw numbers, proportion, all the data has to be processed properly for us to get a full picture. Going back to what was asked of me for poison controls, CDC, two kids die a year from being poisoned. Multiply that by 2, that is 730. As far as shootings in 2018, 1% of gun deaths were accidental, and 1% accounted for 458. Just giving you those numbers as well.
Again, there are no accidents, only negligence. Now, I'm not going to pull back to the gun thing. I will leave that for a so. I feel like it's sabotage that you brought this up knowing that I wasn't a speaker, but that's fine. Now, I'm going to reference a perspective here that I'm not sure maybe some of the viewers may see in relation to this conversation. Now, we talk about proximity, we talk about the numbers, the raw data, then the proportions, how you're more statistically going to encounter someone of your race. But when we talk about issues of police brutality, we don't speak on them as a solely racial situation, because there are black cops that commit violence against black people. Police have a problem with imposing force on citizens and sometimes overstepping those boundaries. Now, there are situations where white people have been killed by the police and it was questionable, and those families have had to fight to get, body camera footage and things of that nature to come to light to pursue these matters. So it's not an exclusive issue to black people. However, we are vocal when these things happen to us because we want justice, just as the other people also want justice. So I don't really think you'd want to find a causality here between police brutality and racism. The police issue is a police issue, and it affects all of us. And it's a very unfortunate thing. And I feel like when you take that proximity, take the inner city, where you have predominantly not well-off African-American people who are going to encounter the police more, they are going to be more susceptible to that violence. Then you do have the media, and I will agree with Mike, that can steer information in the direction they want it to go. Not to say that they're necessarily lying, but I can talk about something that supports the information I want to give as opposed to a broader perspective. So when you hear of these incidents with the police, they typically will go for the situations where it happens to African American people. You hear about those more in the news than you do about the Caucasian people. So I just feel like, as a moderator here, I'm just trying to make this statement clear. As an African American, if I encountered a situation where a Caucasian male was killed by the police and it was questionable, I would advocate just as strong as I would for a person of color as I would for them, because again, it is wrong. So that I want to make clear in terms of this topic. We can talk about black on black violence and its impact on people in the community. And we can also talk about police brutality and its impact. But I also feel that the racism would be a subset of that, not necessarily a mutual thing between the police and just racism. So you have factors that affect people in the community, like you said, Mike, in terms of fear. When I go outside, what am I afraid of? Maybe I'm not afraid of somebody blowing something up in a terrorist attack. Maybe I'm not afraid of the police rolling up and just beating me. I'm more afraid of my fellow man, who I'm more likely to encounter, who may also be well off, who may also be doing things, unfortunately, that are unsavory. So yes, I do agree with you there that in terms of proximity, that would be a concern, a higher concern of possibly encountering the police. However, when you come out of that scope of the inner city and say, get to the suburbs, if I'm an African American and I live in the suburbs, which I do, my fear, even though I'm not doing anything that would result in my interaction with the police, unfortunately, I'm going to have to put them at a higher priority as far as my life being taken than, say, a mugger or a carjacker. Not to say that it can't happen, but again, I'm more likely to encounter a police interaction than I am with the criminal interaction in my proximity. So when I go outside, I have to recognize that. Are my taillights good? Was I speeding? Is my tent too dark? Things that are going to attract attention to me from the police. If that attraction is made, is the transaction going to end with violence on me because of my imposing nature, because of my inherent ability to be violent? Yes, I can be violent. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be violent, especially if I've done nothing wrong in my eyes. So when I'm accosted by the police and they have a negative perception of me because of my skin color, that is going to create a negative reaction from me, which they won't appreciate, and it goes downhill. That's how discussions sour. So again, and I bring this to you, Mike, because I do appreciate your perspective on how you look at things in terms of how you've come up in the area you are from. Even understanding that your fear of your fellow man was more prevalent than your fear of the police and your interactions, you did say at the beginning of this conversation that you have not had many positive interactions with the police. Although you weren't afraid of them killing you, you can recognize that the interactions were unsavory. So compound that with the people who are being affected and who are being harmed. You know, you say one thing out of line, now you're on the ground. Now you have a black eye, the pavement's in your face. You know, you don't have that leniency and you don't have that overall restraint. And that's what we want as a community, is just restraint. You know, because we see, again, this can be perpetuated by the media, Caucasian people mouthing off to the police, threatening the police, literally flat out saying that they'll kill the police. And the officer just stands there because he's not afraid. However, if I move too fast, you're afraid. Now your gun is drawn. You're worried about me. As a gun owner, you can look at it from this perspective. And I'm not using this as a gun debate. You as a black man walking down the street open carrying your weapon is going to get a reaction from the police before a white individual walking down the street open carrying his weapon. So, and I'm sure that you can recognize these things, and maybe you don't agree with what I'm saying, but at least I want to hear your opinion on what I'm saying in terms of that, knowing that there is a disparity between the reaction you get from police compared to what you would expect to get from a criminal. If you know you're dealing with criminals around you and you expect to have that type of interaction, you have to carry yourself a particular way. But when it comes to the police, I shouldn't be expecting a negative transaction when I deal with them. Yet when it happens, like Vernon said, there's typically no accountability, no repercussion, and it tends to continue. So give me your thoughts in that perspective as far as the police are concerned.
It's wrong, and police do bad things to everyone, you know, and I don't like the police for that. I know that the police, there are a lot more bad police than there are good police, you know, and they do bad things, you know, and they do bad things to every race, pretty much. And I mean, I don't know how to. I'm kind of scrambled right here, right now.
I hear you.
Um, but
Take
you
your time, man.
know, like, all right, like now, you know, I stay in a predominantly white neighborhood. If I was to encounter, you know, a cop who did, you know, pull me over because of the color of my skin and did treat me in such a way because I am an African American guy, there are laws out there such as hate crime and things that I can do, you know, to protect myself against that cop, you know, and I think that uh, the guy that, you know, being killed by the police, because that's wrong, you know, that cop was wrong. He should do time for that. This, that, and the other. I mean, wrong is wrong. There are racist cops too. There are racist cops. There's bad cops. There's racist black cops. There's, you know, the racist Mexican cops. There's some of everything everywhere within everyone. You know, and as a police officer, is not excused. And I'm with you on that. You know, police ought to be accountable for their actions, especially in the black community, because it disproportionately affects the black community. And you know, I'm with you on that. You know, I don't like the police for that, but it's
But
also
when you say that, you also say that racism isn't an issue. So how can we agree that there are racist police and that it is a disparity between the interaction
racism.
with the police?
Racism is an issue if we let it be an issue. You know, if a white kid gets killed by a cop, what is the first thing the white community going to do? Are they going to riot and burn down the town? No, they're going to hit the police in their pockets. They're going to take the shit to court. You know, as a black community, the first thing we do when a black person is killed is we go crazy, we go ballistic. And the game of life is not checkers, it's chess. And that's what white
Breonna
folks need to
Taylor's
get
murder
to.
resulted in a $12 million settlement against the police department, which we as taxpayers actually pay. So again, I mean, I really don't think that that is a measure of true punishment to that establishment because they're not the ones levying the punishment. You know,
Or with the
so
Breonna Taylor case.
yeah, I mean,
You
you're talking $12 million, and that they paid that like that, like whatever.
Yeah, I was sickened by the Breonna Taylor case. I feel like she needs more. I feel like the cops ought to be accountable for what they did, you know, and uh, you know everything that happened about the Breonna Taylor case. I'm totally with Breonna
But
Taylor's side. I'm not on the cop side when it comes to that, but I don't think that was a racial issue. You know, the
but
cops ran
Go ahead.
into their house. A shot was fired, whether it was black or white people in the home. If a shot is fired at the cop, they're gonna fire back. And I think that, and I think that Breonna Taylor should have got more justice. I think the cops who shot, you know, ought to be more accountable for what he
I mean,
did.
she got no justice, none.
No,
Um,
no justice at all. They got the 12 million, but no, justice wasn't really solved in that case.
so what my thing is kind of twofold with what we're saying. So I agree, Johnny. I used to argue up and down. You Racism is hard to prove unless
It
it's
is.
overt. As many of our conversations have talked about, like people really categorize racism as an extreme mental issue, damn near,
It's
where
not.
you have to have a specific act or a specific uh, verbiage you use. You have to do all these things to be racist. But my problem is this, especially when it comes back to that term, black on black crime. I tell people all the time, don't perpetuate stereotypes. So there are stereotypes about African American males. And I'll tell people, hey, don't be late because it's perpetuating a stereotype. Don't, it's tough to, you know, be around fried chicken or things that lead to jokes and all these things because they will perpetuate a stereotype, even if you like it.
mhm.
But the problem I have with a term like black on black crime is it perpetuates a stereotype and it's false. It's a created evidentiary item for stereotypes. So when people talk about violence and all these things, I completely don't agree with the whole statement that what do we do when somebody is shot by the police? We burn everything down. Detroit never there. the Nike store in downtown Detroit never put up one board on its windows worrying about rioting and looting since George Floyd's death and things like that. In the early, get my years right, 93 and 94, 2 years after Rodney King, when Malice Green was killed in Detroit, you did not see the same riots as when the Blind Pig was raided in the 1960s or the race riots in the 1940s for Detroit. But if we do have a civil uprising in Detroit, let's not act like it wouldn't be surrounded from the same entities. So riots happened in the 60s because of mistreatment by law enforcement towards blacks. Riots happened in the 1940s in Detroit for mistreatment of law enforcement towards blacks in the black community. So I don't have to keep watching history repeat itself to push back against history.
But it does repeat itself.
But I'll say this. In July, there was a shooting, officer-involved shooting in Detroit back in July. Chief Craig came on TV by 7 o'clock that night and put out the body cam footage where you can see young man made a very bad life decision. He pulled out a firearm. He discharged his firearm at officers, and he was shot. The initial story that people were starting to gather is, oh, he was shot for no reason. Nothing happened. Chief Craig kind of put that to bed that no, he kind of did everything that would lead to this. And guess what? There were no riots. There was no uprising. There was no anything because it was, okay, we at least can see what happened. But here's what happened in Kenosha. You see, if without that cell phone footage from the Jacob Blake shooting, other than dialogue, what narrative would we have about the Jacob Blake shooting? They don't have body cameras, so accountability is minimal. Trust in police is minimum in that community. So it's hard to say those things, but the black on black crime just gives the easiest BS excuse for treating African American males as criminals and violent offenders, no matter who they are. And that's where I think the problem is. It's not a racism problem. It is continuing to perpetuate the nonsense that isn't true. That the black family isn't nuclear. That the black family is fatherless or comes from either a dead father from violence or a absent father from either a criminal act or just negligence. All these things just aren't true, but it only is talked about for African Americans and specifically African American males. And that's what needs to stop. So like homogeneous violence, I will keep saying, happens. But when we call it black on black, it's just to give an excuse for an officer to treat a black male as a threat. And that is what I think is so dangerous.
I want to add this before we continue. Malice Green's death was only 6 months after Rodney King.
Oh.
So I'm not sure how that affects. I mean, it fortifies what you're saying, Bird, in terms of we did not riot. We did not do anything. We let the justice system handle what they did, and
it did.
Right.
But it did. I don't want to say it like this. The justice system worked in the Malice Green murder because I want to say because we're in Detroit, and there's evidence of Detroiters won't continue to take that. Now that's no different than Rodney King in L.A. and because you had the Watts riots in the '60s. You've had civil uprisings about race for forever, but that's also because of things like the Willie Brown lynching, where whites go into a public building, a courthouse, take a black criminal, kill him because he is such a danger to the community, and nobody is charged. Now that's historical. That's hundreds of years ago.
Right.
No, that memory still exists when I see a black male in cuffs, no matter what you're saying he's on, be smothered, be beaten, be tased when there's nothing that indicates a threat.
Now, I totally understand, Mike, that you feel like, the police do have an issue and it should be addressed. So I understand that you recognize that and you agree. The only reason why I question you was that you were saying, in terms of like how you said we allow racism to affect us negatively as opposed to, say, rising above it. However, I feel like that's basically saying we should be the bigger quote unquote men, but in terms of not really addressing the fact that what is happening to us is wrong and shouldn't be happening. So how do we correct the issue if the answer is ignore it? So if we ignore it, it's not going to stop. So we know we don't like it. So we're basically being told to accept something we don't like, that is a detriment, and continue to move on beyond it, and despite itself. So I want you to elaborate some more on that, because I'd like to get more of your perspective on where you're coming from with that.
Well, the enemy is always going to try to stop us, and the enemy knows our weaknesses. They know what it takes to stop us, such as racism. I feel like the media, if they want to reach a certain narrative, they're going to get to it. And if gaining such whatever they want from the black community, all they have to do is send the black community in fear. All they have to do is bring up racism. That's a big problem that we've always had. A lot of people fear racism, and I don't think that we need to fear racism. Yeah, it's competition. When it comes to racism, like wanting to work for a big time corporation for a white man's company or whatever. But I don't think it's an issue that should stop us from doing anything. I don't think it's an issue that can really stop us from moving forward. I mean, racism has been around forever. It's always been here, and black people have always progressed through it. So why should we dwell on it now? Why should we stop and worry about it now? Why not continue to move forward? I mean, racism has always been here. We never thought we'd have a black president, but we've had a black president. We never thought that we'd have black billionaires. Look, we have more black billionaires than we've had 10 years ago. If 10 years ago we decided, hey, we need to fear racism, we need to stop moving forward and address racism, then we wouldn't be here today where we at as far as black people, in our success. So we don't need to stop now and be afraid of racism. Yeah, we need to address it. We need to protect ourselves against it, and we need to, of course, be aware of it. Racism is real. I get that. We need to protect, just like how drugs is real, just like how violence in general is real. There's bad things out here in this world. You know what I'm saying? But we don't need to let it affect our life. And we don't just like when it goes going back to black on black violence. We know that there's black on black violence. We know that the chances of us going outside, depending on where we live, are dangerous for us. Do we let it stop our lives? No, we continue to go to work every day. We just prepare ourselves a bit more for it. We don't let it become an issue in our life. We don't let it stop our life. We continue to work through it. And I think that that's the same approach we need to take on police brutality and racism. We don't need to let it stop our life. We need to work ourselves through it and continue to work through it and not let it become an issue of our life.
I just want to understand a little bit, just clarify a little bit with me before we continue with Vernon, with your point. When you say stop our lives, like, what capacity do you mean in terms of our reaction?
If we're not gonna let black on black violence stop our lives, if we're gonna be aware that there's a chance that we can go outside and get shot, for instance, if we can live life with that, then we can live life that, hey, there's a chance that somebody's not gonna like me by the color of my skin. We might as well take that into consideration as well. We don't need to let it be an issue, and we don't need to be afraid of it.
But you would have a neighborhood watch in that community that would be tasked with attempting to curb that violence. So it's still taking a proactive measure, even though you recognize that the danger is still there. So I feel like
neighborhood watch has an effect on police brutality as well. They can sense police brutality just as well as they can sense any type of violence that's going on outside.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Now, Vernon, go ahead. I know you had a point you wanted to make.
Well, I kind of got to touch 2 points. Like, I understand your perspective. This is where my pushback is going to be. When you say black on black crime and black on black violence, then I live in Farmington Hills, Michigan. I work in Lake Orion, Michigan. Then that means when I encounter African American in those two environments, then I should expect a certain level of potential threat. I don't. And this is why. Because the environment is what leads to the potential threat, not the color of somebody's skin that is in that environment. I don't go to the ATM after like it's dark. Why? Because that's not a safe thing to do because of the environment. I don't care where I'm at. If I'm in the suburbs, if I'm in the city, I don't do certain things because that is dangerous. Oh, Mike's in the phone call.
So,
but I'm also.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Mike,
guys.
I'm on. This is where my kind of pushback is. When you say we have made it past racism, so I'm going to just kind of look at the scope of what we can consider us landing here, 1619 in racism. What has gotten us the progression from 1619 to now? It hasn't been to just get over it. It has been stepping up and doing things that tear down the establishment. And the greatest quote I've heard recently is, you cannot tear down the master's house with the master's tools. So I could go to court. And how did that shit look for Breonna Taylor? That's all they did. They waited, they went to court, and they got egg on their face. You cannot tear down the master's house with the master's tools. I don't care. You could go through slave rebellions. You could go through race riots in every major city through the 1940s up to the 1960s. You could go throwing and showing racism for what it was as a systemic issue, with the marching over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, with Emmett Till's mother burying him with an open casket, or having his funeral with an open casket. No, if you want to get over it, you have to address it. You can't just say, accept it. No, I'm going to have to tear this structure down. And like Johnny said, it's not about racism per se that is fear. With police, it is because of my skin tone, I am perceived as a certain threat that has shown itself to be a great defense for treating me inhumanely. And that's how Black Lives Matter started. I should matter because I am a human, and you should look at me as a human before you look at me as a threat. So that's my only pushback.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I'm agreeing to everything you're saying, bro. I'm not disagreeing at all. I mean, I agree with you saying. I think the only difference between me and you is the way we're looking at it, you know, the way we're looking at things. Going back to the Breonna Taylor case, you know, had they known that it was me, that's just coming from me. If that was me and that was my woman in bed, she's getting ready to go to bed, and there's bamming and sound like someone's breaking in, well, buddy, I'm gonna head to the front door. I'm seeing what's the problem, gun in hand and everything. And if I had to shoot, I'm shooting until the threat stops. I'm not letting off a warning shot. I'm not, oh, I wasn't sure exactly who was at the door. Me personally, I'm gonna find out who's at my door, and if it was a threat, they would have been stopped.
But see, that's the situation here, though. You're talking about going to your front door. You encounter 4 to 5 gentlemen who are not in uniform, who did not address themselves as officers, forcefully entering your home.
So there was a visual. There was a visual before the shooting?
The determination was that they were seen with the SWAT team after the shooting, that they were in plain clothes. So they were not in uniform. And one would have to argue.
If he seen the guys, he had to see guns.
Right, but what I'm saying is they didn't announce themselves as officers and they weren't in uniform. So you seeing that would be a threat. So you respond to that threat as a normal person would, yet here we are, they're using that against you because you, as he did, would have gone to jail because they arrested him and put him in jail for exercising his right that he had, and she's gone. There's nothing you can do about that. We can't get her back, yet no one was charged with her death.
Mm-hmm.
From my understanding, guys are shooting through the doors.
But I'm not a gun person. But one thing, when I talk to my gun friends, the one thing for say me, if I'm a homeowner, I have to see the threat, and the threat has to be imminent towards me. So I can't shoot through doors. I can't
No,
shoot
that's
at
how it is for the
somebody else.
gun community. You're not supposed to shoot through doors. You're supposed to see
Exactly.
the threat, know it's a
So
threat.
why is that threshold of responsibility lower for somebody trained better? That's where my question is.
So,
Why would the
what is it
threshold?
again?
He's
So
questioning the fact that as a civilian, we are expected not to fire through doors and address threats and recognize them, whereas the police, based on the charges, seem to not have the same responsibility.
And that's why I feel that they should be accountable. That's why I feel like those officers should be arrested right now, because exactly. And I totally agree. That's why I agree with everyone on the
And
Breonna
in
Taylor case.
agreeing
I
with
believe that
it,
those officers should be arrested right now.
but
But
that's
I also, as a gun owner, I wasn't supposed to shoot. Well, I have more of a right to shoot without seeing the threat as a homeowner, as opposed to the police shooting through the door, because a threat is a threat when I'm a homeowner. No one's supposed to be banging on my door. No one's supposed to be coming through my door. So for me to shoot through a door, I'm more justified than that cop is for shooting through a door, because there is a threat going on the other side of that door.
But I'm going to take that all the way back to your original point, though. Like you said, they should be held accountable. This is wrong. It's a problem. Yet nothing happened. Yet you were also saying
That's not a racist issue. That's a police issue.
That's what I said, though. I said that it's not racism, it's police. But my thing is, you're saying that we should be able to rise above these issues, but we try to let it play out the way it should.
Not so much as rise above it and ignore it. I mean, play it smart. We need to play it more smart as black people. You know, if that was a white person, they're taking it to court. They have lawyers. They have their whole situation set up, and they're ready to fight.
And they did that. That's what happened. They already had that. That's what happened. That's how I got $12 million.
Yeah, you get $12 million, but there's no penalty for
the police or the police.
Let's take it to another situation. So I'm sure you all are aware of the woman that called the police, said there was someone in her backyard. Mm-hmm. They drove through the alley. She approached the police to let them know what was going on. Officers, startled by her presence, reached across his partner and fired through his window and killed that woman. She was white. This officer technically was African American. He went to jail. Like, it was almost an open and shut case. Mm-hmm. They reviewed it. You're wrong. Jail. Move on. Everybody's happy. So when you look at that situation, how it relates to a Caucasian person, when that wrong has happened to them, justice seems to play out. However, when it happens to someone like Breonna Taylor, nobody was questioning this lady's record. No one looked at to see if she had been in jail or if she had posted pictures online with a gun or had marijuana. No one questioned any of that. It was, hey, this is wrong. And he should answer for that.
That was a very...
Breonna Taylor, everyone under the sun is trying to figure out a reason to make it make sense. See, we see it happen, and we are like, this doesn't make sense. This is wrong. We need justice. Yet everyone else is saying, well, how can I piece the information together so that it makes sense so we can move on as a status quo? And I feel that that is the wrong that's perpetuated against people of color, because when we experience those wrongs, the narrative is, how can we justify it? How can we make it make sense?
Highlights. That's what the media highlights. That's what they want you to know. But if the average person did as much research as the normal person does, they will find that there are plenty of cases out there where both white and black people are unjustified when it comes to the law and police. The media choose what they want to highlight and wants you to know what you want to know for a certain reason. You know, that was wrong. Everything that you're saying is true. Everything that everyone's saying here is true. But, you know, the media only gives you what they want to give you. I mean, everybody knows about the rapper The Baby, right? Everybody knows The Baby. He shot and defended himself in a Walmart, and you can't take guns in a Walmart. Is he in jail locked up right now for that? No, he was justified. He's a black man, you know, and he's from South Carolina or North Carolina, wherever he's from. So it depends on whatever the media dish out to you to get you to think what they want you to think.
I'm just going to add this about the Breonna Taylor case. We didn't even know it happened until 2 months after she died. So, and the only reason we knew about it is not because of the media. You had Facebook, you had Twitter, you had Instagram talking about it to the point where it got so big, the media then picked up on it. But if it wasn't for social media, speaking up on the Breonna Taylor case, a lot of people wouldn't have known about it.
Well,
But
I mean, social media is an extension of the media.
I'm going to even take you a step further with that, Johnny. That's exactly what I was about to say. You research through mediums,
Mm-hmm.
printed mediums, digital mediums, like mediums are where you get information from. So this attack on the media giving misinformation and things like that, no. Yeah, we talked about it. The media will post articles about what you will click on. The media will post on the cover of a newspaper something that will entice you to buy the newspaper. CNN wants you to watch their network, so they will give you as much of what is needed for you to watch their network. But here's the other thing about the media: they can't lie. They can tell the stories they want. They may not tell the story of the firefighter giving his kidney to one of his colleagues to save his life. Because guess what? Thousands of people do that every year. Hundreds of thousands of people make sacrifices like that every year. That's not going to get you to watch CNN, but it is going to get you to watch CNN. And if we're looking at the media, it will work both ways. The fact that we're talking about black on black crime is terminology that comes from the media. The fact that Joe Biden signed the crime bill back in 1994 was based upon the images coming out of major cities of gun violence in these drug infested, high poverty areas. That was the media that put that out there, and that led to legislation being made because of real images. But those real images weren't telling the full story. And now I'll say we can't backtrack on things where we're looking at everybody thinks this is colors back in 1988 where gang violence is just leaving people dead in the streets. Uh, MS-13 might wind up in your neighborhood. No, they won't. Black people aren't killing random people or killing random black people in the streets.
Really, they're not.
No,
For the
no.
most part, no.
Statistically,
No. So the funeral that was just shot up less than 2 months ago, that wasn't just black people going out shooting anybody?
I didn't say the characters fit a certain race, but random crime because people are black on other black people just does not exist. I said earlier, drug dealers kill drug dealers, gang members kill gang members, and that's not exclusive to the United States. That's not exclusive to black. That's not exclusive to white. Guess what? Meth dealers kill meth dealers, and they're not black. So it is the thing that happens, and a lot of people know this. I have a brother that succumbed to gun violence randomly, and he was in Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't on the south side of Chicago. He wasn't on the east side of Detroit. Now, if you look at the guy that killed him, he has the same complexion as my brother. Because when you're in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, you will migrate to places, clubs, bars, things like that, nightlife, with people like you. So it's not just the fact that, oh, black people are killing black people because we're these savages looking for other black people to exterminate. No, it's environmental, it's proximity, it's all of those things, which those things happen. But again, the guy that shot my brother, he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. I don't think there was any question about that once he was arrested, once witnesses came to testify. But now here's my question. How many different ways can we fit narratives of violent savages being black as the excuse, as Johnny is saying, to justify why we have violent acts versus blacks from law enforcement, whether the media perpetuates it or whatever? But why do we look at these things? Why does the Attorney General in Kentucky, why does he only bring one witness to the grand jury? One person that can say that that person heard the police identify themselves, when there are 12 witnesses that went and made official statements that said no, they did not hear anybody acknowledge that they were law enforcement.
Yeah, that's police officers protecting police officers. The police officers was there to do an invasion because they thought drugs were in the house, and they thought they were dealing with drug dealers, not because it was a black woman or a black man in the house. They're just trying to protect the police officers and justify them, and because maybe there was some sort of wrong going on within a police department, but then they're trying to cover it up. But the reason that they were there, it was for a drug bust. And
because black crime is considered bad. Black
all
people
crime is considered
crime.
bad. Oh, and whether it was a white person or a black person, they would have tried to cover it up. They would have tried to justify it in the police's favor.
No. Only thing I don't agree with that, like my pushback, I understand it, but no, all crime is not bad, because you are not having county sheriffs. Now, you may have local PD from a municipality kicking in doors. You are not going to tell me that county sheriffs are busting meth labs and going into these trailer park communities, or going.
Well, tell me if
treating
Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, if he hadn't shot a shot off, do you think the situation would have ended the way it did?
They shouldn't have even been there.
If police been at that home and he would have been there, he would have been put on the ground, he would have been detained, and potentially he would have been put in jail, regardless of the situation as far as a shot being fired, because they were going into that house looking for drugs. And a lot of times when they don't find drugs, they find drugs because they don't want egg on their face. So the whole situation was bad from jump because the information was relayed to give them a warrant to go into that home. So the person that's breaking the law doesn't live there.
Right.
You don't have any proof that he's been there. Yet, on the pretext that they used to be an item was enough to justify going into her home. Now, I will disagree as far as the white versus black thing. If Breonna Taylor was white, they would have never got that warrant to go in her house, period. They would have needed a lot more evidence to justify a warrant to go into her home, certainly to give a no-knock warrant to go into that home, if it's not the person that they're looking for. So I would say, in that term, you were using the black threat as a justification to get that warrant to go in in force.
They said her name was on a warrant, though. They said her name was on a warrant. That's what I heard. Now, we all going off different stories.
If she was a white person, that warrant would not have been given, because there would not have been enough evidence to give said warrant. They didn't have enough.
Well, for the information that I got, from what I was told that her ex-boyfriend was a drug dealer, and she used to help him sell drugs. That way, that's her name was on the search warrant. And whether they were shooting or not, that would have went on. Breonna Taylor would have ended up arrested.
She has no charges pending or no charges issued for drug distribution.
That's the information I got. The information that her name was on the warrant and she was going to get arrested that night. If a shot wasn't fired, then no shooting would have ever occurred. But because the shot was fired, of course the police are going to fire back. Whether it was justified, I don't think it was justified the way they did it. But if you shoot at police officers, they're going to shoot back.
But what I'm saying
is right or wrong. Not saying it's right or wrong. But if he hadn't shot that shot, nobody would have been killed. Breonna Taylor would have been in jail, and she would have got out, because if she was innocent the way people say she would be alive and free right now to today.
I can't
really say in the front door without announcing themselves as police and not react.
They said they knocked. The guy who shot, I apologize if I disrespect, I forgot his name, but Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, he said he heard knocks. Neighbors said they heard knocks. That's the story that I'm getting.
That's not announcing yourself, though. I can knock on your door at night, and that's fine.
I'm not talking about, hello, this is the Jehovah Witness. I'm talking about banging and bamming knocks.
Right.
Not an ordinary knocks.
The police, though. So if someone was to do that right now while I'm on video with all of you, and I live in West Bloomfield, so I'm not
We would
expecting.
all know that it's no criminal. We would all know it's not a criminal. We would all know, damn, that's the police, the way they knock. The way you knocking like the motherfucking police.
But if I haven't done anything wrong, why would I expect the police to be at my door?
Exactly.
Let me add this before we continue. Just yesterday, they just found out the detective's attorney acknowledged that Breonna Taylor's search warrant was inaccurate. Just adding that to the conversation.
Right. But
What happened?
He said it was just an address. It was not actually.
No, it was inaccurate.
Inaccurate.
Inaccurate, correct.
Okay.
What was inaccurate?
But I'm going to throw this out there. I'm going to go with an extreme that I talked about kind of one of our first weeks. I don't care if Breonna Taylor used to run numbers for Bumpy Johnson. I don't care if Breonna Taylor was right next to Tony Montana back in the 80s. I could care less. The warrant was a search warrant, no knock, as if she was a main stash drug house. So whether you're looking at how they not, if it could have been assumed that they were police, all of these other things, guess what? At the time they bust in, at the time that he fired one shot, they were not doing police duty that is consistent with how policing happens in different environments and towards different people.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell me.
They should be locked up right now. I agree with you.
But that's where the distrust comes, is you can't make that make sense. Like, and that's the one thing I go back to. Why do blacks have to be like, with all due respect, it would take someone like me getting shot and killed for people to say like, oh well, that, man, that's really bad.
I don't know, Vern. I remember you got detention once, and I can probably pull it up on your record. So we
like it's crazy to me that you can't be a black that has done anything in life, even gone through the justice system, without it being deemed that it is acceptable to treat you as a violent criminal.
Now I'm gonna lead here real quick. I'm gonna lead because I feel like if I was sitting where Mike is right now, my response would be, guys like me, guys like you, Vernon, we're still alive. So we say that, yet we do everything right. We don't break the law, and we don't have the police on our necks. We don't have the criminal element trying to take our lives. So one could, and I'm trying to play devil's advocate here because I want to be impartial, one could make the argument that the way we conduct ourselves is the reason why we're still alive. Because I go out of my way not to break any laws. I have no record. I don't even have any tickets. Because
I'm gonna call Jonathan Price in Texas and see if that worked. I'm gonna call Botham Jean in Texas. I'm gonna see if that worked. I'm gonna call someone who had their neighbor call for a wellness check, who's playing video games with her nephew and gets shot because an officer is creeping around her house for a wellness check. You know what the easiest way to do a wellness check? Ding dong. Oh, your neighbor called when the human comes to the door wondering if you're okay. That's how wellness checks go. So I get it. Or Philando Castile. I would agree with that. Hey, I got my paperwork that says I'm legally allowed to carry. Hey, you pulled me over for a tail light. I have a gun on me. It's right here. But pop, pop, pop. I understand it, and trust me, law enforcement, I got former students that are Southfield PD. One of my good friends is Southfield PD. I work with cops all the time. This isn't an indictment on cops. This is an indictment on people that perpetuate the stereotype of black-on-black crime, that make it so that what happens at a funeral in Chicago between gang members is something that should justify and criminalize every African American.
I still just can't compare racism to police brutality at all. Think of the little kids who just got killed over the summer due to black and brown, violence in the black and brown communities. We don't riot and burn shit down for kids. But when they get killed, we don't riot and burn shit down when innocent when innocent children who just walk into school or just is sitting in their living room are killed from stray bullets.
Right.
Now,
You cannot compare that to
Do we
police
go to
brutality.
city?
Get
Hold on.
what's to them if they're caught.
Let
And
me
we
just
know
say, I'm just
the system is going to actually impartially put judgment on them, and you're not going to have a system that's trying to protect them. So those stray bullets and the criminals, the gangs, all of those things, those cats are going to be looked for. And if they're found,
They
will
never do get found. I can date back from 1990s of people who committed murders and violence that never been solved. It will never be solved. And if the mission was to fucking lock and put away with black people, then we all know black people kill black people. Then those black people who shoot black people would also be getting killed. I mean, would also be getting put in jail. Nobody's
I
trying to
heard
look for
us-
those killers.
I've never heard us worry about blacks not being incarcerated.
right.
That's kind of new. Which I'm not disagreeing with what is used as evidence for this stereotype that is created. But again, going to black on black, and you even mentioned black on brown, it's the environment. If the big news that happened a month or two ago, when a 5-year-old is shot in his front yard by a black man, cannon hunted, I got white friends that were losing their damn minds. Like, why is this not on CNN? Why is this not here?
Exactly why?
Because he was already caught. What news is it?
It was on news as well, but it was
So
not
how many
where-
children?
it was
How
not
many children
where
got
it's
killed in
from.
Chicago this summer? Can we answer that? How many children
I'm
got
about
killed
to,
in Chicago?
let me add this
I'm
as
with
well.
you. I'm not. How many?
And how many
kids?
people? How many black people that were killed by police did we rioted for this summer?
Let me just add this, because you were talking about protests for kids in Chicago. That actually happened. That happened in
Not
Detroit.
just in Chicago, though. Not
That's
just
what
in
I'm saying.
Chicago. How about New York? How about
That's what I'm
California?
saying.
How about all the
That's what I'm
inner cities?
saying, though. That's what I'm saying, though. The problem is the media is not perpetuating that because it doesn't get clicks. It doesn't get
Because
likes,
they want to fear you with police brutality. They want to fear you with white and white supremacists. They don't
But
want to
it
let you know
does
that
happen.
our issue is
The
the
thing
real issue
is-
we should be concerned about. They don't want us to
thing is-
worry about killing each other. They want us to worry about the police killing us. They want us to worry about the white boys coming to kill us.
But I
They
got
don't
a
thing
want
question.
is,
us
it
to
happens.
address
Who
what's really
accepts-
affecting our communities.
Right, but who accepts these homicides in the community? Because that's my thing.
The no
Is-
snitching. We got a no snitching code in the black community. We can see somebody get murdered in our eyes. We're not gonna say shit. We're not gonna say
But-
nothing.
But the code isn't for 7-year-old gets shot. That's not the code. The code is you sell drugs, he sells drugs. You on his corner, he wants you off his corner, and violence happens.
That's not how it is nowadays. That's not how it is nowadays. People
Crime
are
is
trying to build a
there's no
reputation
crime
nowadays. That's a trend now. You can pop pills. The drugs that's in the black communities right now that they're doing will put you on a level to the point where you will go out and commit senseless crimes.
Well, let me ask you
Pop
this, Mike.
Molly, you sip
Let
lean
me
and
ask
all that shit. You're not in your right mind. You will, and you listen to the rap music that's out here. Yeah, you will go out and start killing people for no reason.
That's another subject too. But let me ask you this real quick. So we had a little 6-year-old boy, and the media wants to use the term execution style killing over and over again. Him and a lady were just murdered in Detroit not too long ago. Now, the gentleman that was caught doing it, I don't know his exact ethnicity, but I can tell you he was not black.
Right.
But I don't know everything about this story. But based on how the media has presented it, if I was to be objective, I would assume that this had something to do with drugs in the way that the violence was played out. Someone was levying a punishment to someone that resulted in these people being killed. They found him. He's under arrest. He was not black. And the narrative is not, we have to stop this drug violence. They're just like, this was a violent crime and we're looking for justice. And it just so happened that this dude was not black, but he killed black people. We're not saying that it was a racially motivated crime. No one's saying, oh, well, this white dude killed these black people. Like, no, he killed a child. The community was in unrest about it, and justice was handled out quickly. They found this man quickly and arrested him quickly. So in terms of the situations, and I know, like, we hear as a gun owner, you hear about Chicago all the time. You hear about Chicago, you hear about New York, you hear about California, because they're areas where guns are heavily regulated. yet we have higher numbers in crime. And as a gun owner, you typically say, well, that's because people can't protect themselves. So you hear about these stories in Chicago every weekend. The news has a blurb. X amount of people were killed in Chicago this weekend. It was a very violent weekend. There is no one in these communities, and I am not from Chicago, but again, even when I hear this story, I'm not indifferent to it. It's terrible. And if I had information that could lead to an arrest, if I knew, like if someone was like, hey man, my cousin did that murder, I would do what I could to bring it to justice, because wrong is wrong. So when you talk about the black on black element of the crime, that I feel is where you're getting a lot of the contention, because a lot of these crimes, 50% of murders go unsolved. Any murder, 50% of them. If I was to go outside right now and walk a mile in any direction with my gun, let's say my revolver, so I don't have a shell casing that goes anywhere, and I just decide I'm going to shoot somebody tonight, and I shoot them and go back home. If no one saw me do it, and no one saw who I was, and I went back home, that crime is going to be very difficult to solve, because there's no motive. There's no reason for it. I didn't want anything. I wasn't trying to get something from someone. I literally just wanted to go take a life. There is evil in the world. There are people in the world who literally just want to take a life. And that's why you find that a lot of these crimes aren't solvable. So these kids, you know, and there is a gang element there where that is street cred. Like, you got to take a life to get in, you know, and unfortunately, that's going to be a random act of violence. So there's not going to be a motive there to have information to track it down and find someone to bring them to justice. So the crime element is a problem. Yes, it is definitely a problem. It needs to be handled, and we need to find ways to better handle these situations. However, the difference, the sole difference, these are criminals. And criminals will typically be brought to justice, or at least they will attempt to if they can get the proper evidence to do so. But what we find when it comes to the police, we have all the evidence we need. We have video evidence. We have witness testimonies. You know, we even have victims who don't die, who are still alive. Yeah, this dude shot me in the back 7 times. Yet, either no charges, nothing was wrong, or we go to court and we just say that nothing was wrong, and they go about their lives. Half of them are paid during their time away from the job, so you're basically given a vacation for shooting somebody. And that's where you have the upheaval, because unlike in the situations with the kids where, yes, people are upset, but what do I burn down? Am I going to burn down a gas station because a kid got murdered? Like, what is that going to actually solve? Where, because the establishment is not the one that's perpetuating that violence. The establishment's not the one that took my child from me. The streets did that. So I need to get back with the streets. But when the establishment is causing that pain, taking a life, and then they look you in the eye and say, nothing to see here, move on, what is your next recourse?
We vote. You know, it all comes back to how we vote as well. You know, who we put in the office. You know, and who do we have to go to when these things happen? When one of our own are killed by the police, who is on that level, you know, that we can go to and complain about it and almost expect them to do something for us. You know, as a black community, we've been voting the same for hundreds of years. You know, the way we vote has a huge effect on our communities, and because we don't have nobody to run to when these things happen, you know, there's nothing that can be done about it. You know, we don't have nobody for us in office.
I don't know about
Well,
Chicago. The one thing I disagree with, and I'm gonna get this advertisement again. There's more things on the ballot than Joe Biden and the other dude. There's more on the ballot than Democrat and Republican.
right.
And that's what I'm saying is when
It's more than voting for just president.
but when citizens, so when we have violence in our communities, people do a whole lot, like you're saying. People go to city council meetings. I don't know about you. Every weekend in a black church, an AME church, I guarantee the guy is talking about how we got to do better for ourselves in Chicago. I will guarantee that message is always coming out. But what just happened?
It's a little bit, but I'm still hearing you. We're good.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm hearing you.
But I just think like there are action steps to show disapproval of crime in African American communities. When someone is killed, murals, vigils, going to their aldermans, going to their city council meetings. When people disagree with schools, they go to Board of Education meetings. They vote on those things. Like, it's a lot of actions being taken, but it's hard to tell people, and again, kind of going back to Johnny, I don't know where I can see someone take another person's life, except for when it can be justified because that person was black from this area and you're a police officer, where we watch videos and all of a sudden things outside of the video are what we're trying to look for. You know, at going back to in Detroit, the Coney Island shooting, nobody was sitting there like, well, you know, those three guys might have been, you know, one was sagging, the other one was, had a firearm on him, the other one had some marijuana in his pocket. Nobody's looking for that. You're looking for the perpetrator of the crime because you saw what happened. But literally, when you're looking at three or two gentlemen followed by a third gentleman chasing down a black male in Georgia because he was walking through a vacant home while he was perusing around the neighborhood, and everybody made it seem like he committed a crime at minimum outside of trespassing. And he needed to be detained by citizens. Trayvon Martin, all these things, all these violent acts towards African-American males are excused because we continue to use the narrative of black on black crime. Blacks commit crime. Therefore, if I see a black male and I can determine something might be wrong, I can treat him a certain way, whether it's law enforcement or whether it's just by people that don't look like us. And that comes from, oh, well, Chicago, they had 14 shootings last night. Nobody gives Chicago the credit for Jeffrey Dahmer. So wasn't that some heinous crime against the homosexual community and from a white guy in Chicago? But you don't hear about Jeffrey Dahmer synonymous with violence in Chicago. You don't continue to talk about the synonymous violence from the 1920s in Chicago where people were getting shot all the time, but it's sensationalized and it's glorified because it was the Italian mob. Why do we have to have such a black eye? No pun from that. Because violence happens the same way it happens in all communities.
And police brutality happens almost the same way in every community as it does in black community. It's just that the media only wants you to see the black and police violence.
No. There have been police shootings there have been police shootings against white males that have been questioned.
More than what you think, though. More than what you think.
I agree, but I'll say this.
Do you agree? Do you really agree with that, though? There are more violent. There is, if not more, almost the same amount of violence going on with whites and police than it is black and police. Only the media only shows the black versus police violence.
No, these things called statistics show that that's not accurate. So
statistics show that white people get killed less by police than blacks do.
If you're looking at raw numbers, I'm talking about the fact that if we are talking about the percentage of criminals and criminal acts, so this is my kind of comparison. Back in the day, people used to talk about in China has more honors students than America has students. That is a horrible statistic because China is also 3 or 4 times the size of America. So it doesn't fit. If I'm looking at the probability of arrest and then looking at the probability of arrest leading to excessive force and or death, you are talking about 2 to 3 times higher probability of that happening to a black male than a white male.
Yeah.
So yes, you may see.
If you look at it that way, that may be true.
You may see I'm no 1,000. I'll give you this: per 1,000 white males, you may see 5.5 of them are killed by police per 1,000. And you may see per 1,000 black males, you are talking about 4.5 are killed. And I'm just making up these stats, DM.
I got the stats.
But
I
here's
know
the
I
problem.
got it on my Instagram.
When you actually get into the fact that there are, I'm sorry, I said that stat all wrong. When you're talking about 8.5 black males per 1,000, yes, the fact that there's only 20,000 black males means that the number will be smaller, but the probability of violence is still 2 times greater. So
Sounds like we need more black. Sounds like we need more black people on the force.
We got them. We got them too, but here's where I also say the difference. I don't know about if Johnny sees it in West Bloomfield, me in Farmington Hills. Police officers in Detroit are all athletic young individuals of all races. Police officers in the suburbs are getting pretty hefty because they don't have to do so much. So when you're talking about people that have to get jobs out of the military, things like that, you're talking about white guys from rural Ohio now having to get that police job in Columbus, and they've never even interacted with blacks except for what stereotypes they've seen in rap videos, from the media, or hearing about all the black on black crime.
Same happened here. I mean, because before I came here down here from where I'm at, I didn't believe half of the stuff that I'm experiencing now. I haven't seen so many white folks with drug cases, domestic cases, and gun cases in my life. I never thought it existed, but it does, and it exists in every culture. So I guess we can all agree that in every race, there's violence, there's drugs, there's police brutality, there's everything. We can all agree with that.
That's how I started. Now here's my question. Why don't we have some kind of catchy phrase like black on black crime for all these other things that exist?
Because it doesn't fit right with the media.
No, it doesn't fit right with Americans.
It isn't catchy. Because white on white crime, Mexican, it doesn't fit right. Black on black crime, it doesn't fit right within the media.
Because that would impact the majority. I kind of talked about it on Facebook last week. We have 13 people involved in a militia making plans to overthrow police departments and kidnap the governor of Michigan. And it's not that just the media doesn't call them terrorists. It's the fact that some of my conservative friends and even the president of the United States excuses their behavior because they're upset about how the governor has governed. They're upset about things, but we don't call them terrorists like we do if they were Muslim. We don't call them threats against democracy like we would if they were any type of person of color. Because more Americans are white males than any other demographic group. Therefore, if somebody that looks like me is considered a domestic terrorist, then people will look at me as a domestic terrorist, possibly. Not to say it like this.
The thing is that white people don't want stereotypes that are negative imposed on them.
No,
right.
I got a question. And this is not working in education, and even going to a high school that was majority African American when Columbine happened. Guess what? I don't think anybody in America, and I know tragedies happen, is worried about the African American male football player shooting up a school.
I'm still here, guys. I'm sorry, guys. I'm listening.
I got you. But I mean, so that's my thing is the catchy phrase of black on black crime comes because it's easy to dump negative stereotypes on black males, but it doesn't reciprocate even when things are shown to be the same.
Well, absolutely. I mean, especially with that, because when that happened, I was at Southfield Lathrop, which was a majority African American school, And the next year, I went to Harrison in Farmington Hills, which was predominantly white. And I got to tell you, I was shook because I'm like, man, they about to put me where this stuff happens, and I don't want to be a target. So I'm afraid that, like, you know, the dude that's sitting in the corner that no one's talking to is going to come up in the school shooting stuff. So it's like I never had that fear when I was, you know, around my people, the black on black violence. I wasn't afraid of that. I was afraid of this white boy in the trench coat coming into school with an armament. You know, so it's like, I mean, I feel you. You in that scenario in Chicago with the people around you would have that fear, and I respect that. But we can't discount the fact that these things happen everywhere. So it's not an exclusive problem to just blacks to call it black on black crime. It's just crime. Crime is bad. Why do we have a crime problem in Chicago? We don't have that discussion. We don't really talk about that. We don't try to fix that. We are focused on the black on black element that can't be fixed because it's not really an element to fix. So
I kind of guess that's the way that black on black crime happens. You know, when you look at other crimes again within other communities and other races, all right, is it the way black crime happen? Our funerals being shot up, our children being killed? Is it happening 134 people being killed on weekends? Is it those type of statistics coming from other races though? And
well, let
to
me
the
ask you
point where
this.
we shouldn't take it to an extreme as the point of saying black on black violence. You know, it's we're not looking at Naperville and they're having 134 people killed on a holiday weekend, or we're not looking at any other white or Mexican community and seeing these type of numbers that we're seeing from black communities. So maybe that's why
Looking at
we
the
need to
issue of
take it more
redlining,
serious than what the other races are taking.
I feel you, but are we looking at the issue of redlining that put a lot of these impoverished people into this element together as a powder keg while they walked away? You know, so a lot of these neighborhoods where these things are happening is literally because these people couldn't move anywhere else. So they're all grouped together. What's going to happen when you put an unsavory element together with that many people, especially when you lower the resources and the accessibility to resources in said area? You're going to have crime. It's an absolute fact. So you've grouped people of color in an area, stripped away its resources, and basically as an experiment, let's see what happens. Oh, they're going to
Oh
eat
man,
each
we
other.
all know who works in favor of that though, right?
Go ahead. I mean,
Who's against
But
integration, or who's against, you know?
I feel like that this is leading to something about Joe Biden. Go ahead and
I
say it.
didn't
This
say
is
nothing. I didn't say nothing. Now, is it true? Is it true or not? True or true?
hey, if you want to talk about that, you can. I mean, I'm not. We don't have subjects here. This is called difficult discussion. So that's what we want to talk about. If
But
it's
I
something
feel
that
like a lot of the laws and stuff set out by the Democratic parties are the reason why these inner cities, which, you know, most inner cities are predominantly black, you know, is based off of their laws or their rules and
what
regulations.
laws?
Gun
Like what?
laws, for instance. You know, in rural communities and Republican communities, the law-abiding citizen is encouraged to own firearms in their home, as opposed to the black community, we're encouraged not to have guns. You know, Republican communities, you know, they're
What?
all pro 2A, but in
But
Democrat
but
communities,
why
we're
why are
trying to
we
get rid of them
encouraging to have guns?
because guns fear the bad guys. It's plain and simple. It's common sense. Bad guys fear citizens who own guns.
Let me add
But
something
I'm
before
saying,
we let
but
me add
why
something
are
before we
we?
go on, Vern.
What?
I'm gonna let Vern finish. I'm gonna add something. Go ahead.
Yeah, but why are if it is a deterrent? And I don't know about a deterrent because I know way too many gun owners to say that anybody's deterring gun ownership and Second Amendment freedoms. But my thing is, how are we perpetuated when we have those guns? It it's different when it's just like when we drive something. Oh, you have a nice vehicle. Well, what do you do? Oh, you have a gun on you. Why do you need that? It is the level of questioning, but there's no law in Democratic compared to Republican communities that say you can't have guns. There's a law enforcement problem with looking at law-abiding citizens as criminals because they're black, and the potential of having that gun, Philando Castile, and still being deemed as a threat.
Well,
So I
that's
don't think
All
one.
right.
That's
Democrats
just
or Republicans.
one case in which we seen where a black man had a gun and he was violated by the police. That's at least one. And I agree with you with the fact that if a black man is seen with a gun, just like that protest where we seen where hundreds of black men were protesting with guns, they were automatically feared. So I understand you when it comes to black men having guns, they're gonna be feared. But in reality, I think it'll help us more than it would destroy us.
But I don't think that the fact that a Democratic run city has laws and law enforcement.
It does. When you think about semi-automatic weapons, would you agree that most guns that are out there are semi-automatic weapons?
Man, I I'm gonna be honest with you all. I don't like guns because that's why I lift weights and I live in the suburbs. That is my defense for violence against my family. Be bigger than people and live in places without violence. But as Johnny is saying, I have the ability and resources to do that. If you put a bunch of people without the ability and resources to do that, they have to do other things.
And if it wasn't for the democratic laws that are being pushed by the Democratic Party, it would be much easier for the average person to own a
Let me
firearm.
I think
just
what he's saying in terms of democratic laws would be like a place like Chicago or Illinois, where it's a lot harder as a citizen to purchase and own a weapon, and you don't have a lot of concealed carry ability. So I think that's what he's saying in that respect. Like
Okay. And
you don't have that in a lot of Republican-run states where it's harder as just a normal citizen who hasn't broken the law to purchase a weapon, own it, carry it, distribute it, take it around. It's harder. Like in California, now we're getting a lot of them out like New Hampshire and areas like that where it's restricted.
Right.
let me just add this before we go on.
Could you
Actually,
live
two
in?
things.
Is it hard here in Michigan?
No, not at all.
That's my only frame of reference.
Oh, I understand.
I mean,
I'm just giving the element of clarity to what he's saying.
Oh,
That's
I got you.
Go ahead, Darren.
I was going to add this because he said something earlier about we've been born the same way for 700 years. That's not true. I mean, before the Civil Rights Act, Rights Act 1964, most African Americans were voting Republican. Let's understand that. LBJ was looking at a very hard re-election, and he needed something to get the black vote, and he went against his own party in order to enact the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Civil Rights Act of 68 that pretty much guaranteed the perceived rights that we have today. So let's just understand that. Before 64, most African Americans were voting Republican.
All right.
But even I don't want to turn this into a Democratic Republican thing.
Right.
But one consistent Republican strategy in order to win elections is called the Southern strategy, where it is directly overt racism towards blacks. Why the hell would I ever vote for people that are giving overt racism a leg in any shape or form? But then somebody not being overtly racist, I can't even pinpoint being racist. And if you bring up something from 45 years ago as one line of racism, but it make me ignore 3.5 years of it, come on.
Now, see, we're getting into another topic that I definitely want to cover, but it's almost
3 weeks ago
Hey,
that he
we
said
almost
that was
on 2
racist.
hours.
this is the longest we've ever run one of these episodes. So if we're going to cross over into a new topic, I'd like to save that for another episode. So what I'm going to do now, because I know people are in a marathon watching this right now, and I do appreciate this, I'm going to get into some closing arguments because I really appreciate what we did tonight, and I hope we can do it more. So I'm going to start with Mike because this is your first time here. I would like you to give just a broad closing argument on your belief, where you're coming from, just basically reaffirming it because we, like I said, we just want to understand and get that perspective, and I do appreciate it. So go ahead, give us your thoughts.
Hey, look, I'm been getting shut down for my opinions lately. I mean, I don't hate it. I learn from it. I get stronger from it. I may have some different views from majority of my family and friends, but my whole point of all of this is to try to inform us and kind of try to get us to think outside the box for a change. I really think that black on black. I'm not even gonna say black on black violence because I learned from this interview today that it's not just black on black violence, but violence in our community you know, we can't afford to have that right now because we're in the situation that we're in. We got so much that we're dealing with, racism, etc. You know, so black on black violence to me is what we really need to sort of kind of, you know, work on. And you know, police violence too, you know, that's something that we really need to, you know, pay attention to, but we don't need to make it our issue. And right now, in this year, it just seemed like with the black community, our only issue is police brutality, and besides COVID. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's a bit unfair for some of us who may not experience police brutality, but all we've known is black on black violence. That's unfair to us to just sit up here and just say that, hey, as a black community, as black people, we really need to get this police brutality together. You know, it's not fair for some of us who don't experience that, but experience the black on black crime. You know, I'm not saying that there isn't no police brutality. I'm not choosing sides. I'm not racist in any type of way. I'm just saying we need to don't close an eye to one thing and focus on one. Don't get tunnel vision from what's going on in our communities. You know, focus on everything. Don't just give all our time and energy to police brutality. You know, that's what Black Lives Matter looks to me. It looks as if they're just focusing on just police brutality when we have a lot more issues than that. You know, I'm with you. You know, there is police violence. There's also black on black violence. There's all types of violence going on. We do not, we can't afford to be tunnel vision, and we can't afford to vote in fear and to be feared because we're black.
All right, Vernon, your closing arguments tonight.
Hey, no matter what, one thing I can agree on is you model the behavior you expect to be returned to you. So I do agree with the fact that we got to have better for ourselves. With that being put out there, I'm still going to go back to that quote. We are not going to take down the master's house. Sorry, we're not going to take down the master's house using the master's tools. We have to educate ourselves. We do have to get out there, like Mike said, and vote. We have to make sure that we have a valid voice and that we work hard so that people understand the value that we exist in this country. And for those that are might pop on this later and listen and see and things like that, look inside yourselves when you say terms like black on black crime and see what your intent is for using that. And terminology gets used as weapons a lot in this country. Democrat, Republican, black on black crime, Dem run cities and states, all those things. But guess what? We all got to come together because we're all Americans. And until we stop doing those things where we try and isolate bad guys that are also Americans, we don't make much progress. Only way to get progress is we got to fight that establishment that keeps those things going on.
Thank you. And De'Aaron, I don't normally do this, but as a fact checker, I'm going to give you an opportunity to give some closing arguments because this is your first time here.
As somebody who grew up in the city, you know, as a kid, somebody who spent their teenage years in the suburbs, and somebody who actually moved down south and spent 4 years in the rural area, it is a lot to see what we go through as black men, and we don't all have the same experience. We don't all see it eye to eye. The things that I'm just saying names. The things that Vern goes through or seen may not be the same thing that another person has seen, simply because of their environment. And once we realize, I'm not picking on Vern. I'm not picking on anybody with this comment.
I know it's because I went to Southfield.
Whatever. When we see or when we think about our surrounding area, we tend to think that our surrounding area is the way everybody sees it, which is not true. Going from the north to the south, there are things that people from the south have never heard from before as somebody from the north. There are things that a black person from the north has never seen as black people from the south. I have actually been told this in a particular town. Eating lunch on my way to an NBA game. They will take your money while the sun is up, but when the sun is down, you better not show your face around here. That's what kind of experience I never experienced up north, but I experienced down south. And we just have to understand that racism and police brutality and everything else, all the things that we hear about is a little different from everybody. And we need to respect everybody's viewpoint. Now, there's things that Mike, I don't agree with, but I also have to recognize that his viewpoint is different than mine. Same thing with Bern. Same thing with Johnny. We all are not going to agree on everything. That's for any person, period. But we have to understand everybody's viewpoint is coming on. And if we do that, we can actually be a better place, have better discussions like this, where it's not contentious, it's not, yelling over one another, people are not feeling bad about ourselves. We can bring our knowledge, our personal knowledge to the table, and just have a discussion.
Thank you. And that's really what we look to do here. And again, I vilify you, Vernon, for bringing the guns into it while I'm not a speaker. That ain't right. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you one of these days. We're gonna have that talk. Mike, I appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much. And I would love to have you back if you ever want to share again. This was great. It went really long tonight, but I appreciate every minute of it, and I hope we can do it again. Thank everyone who stuck with us for the whole episode. And if you came in late, it can be viewed later. You can go to my page, Difficult Discussions, and see every episode that we've done. Check them out. Everyone has its own little niche of interesting information to give. And next week, we're going to have another topic. I haven't ironed it out yet, but it will be good. It's always good. Again, thank you, gentlemen, for coming in tonight. I appreciate it. Have a good